Grapes of Wrath. Released in early 1940, The Grapes of Wrath hit screens less than a year after John Steinbeck's best-selling novel was published. The speed was startling, even by studio-era standards, but the timing was strategic. America was still clawing its way out of the Great Depression, and director John Ford didn't shy away from the rawness of that reality. Rather than hammering a message, Ford focused on the resilience of the Joad family, reportedly telling interviewers he wasn't making a political film but a human one, a sentiment widely paraphrased in later retrospectives. Still, backlash followed. Some conservative voices accused the film of pushing socialist themes, citing its portrayal of exploitative labor camps and displaced workers. Studio executives are said to be uneasy, especially under the strict moral guidelines of the Hays Code. Buzz even suggests they push for a more hopeful ending, but Ford resisted, determined to preserve the book's somber tone. That decision may have cost him box office comfort, but it won him critical respect. Henry Fonda's performance as Tom Joad became iconic, especially his closing monologue, which critics still cite as one of the most powerful in American film. Fonda had spent time in migrant camps to prepare, a move that impressed Steinbeck, who later praised the adaptation as a good picture. Not the book, but a good picture. Cinematographer Greg Toland, fresh off Wuthering Heights, brought his signature deep focus style, using harsh lighting and stark shadows to echo the Dust Bowl's bleakness. His work here laid the groundwork for his later innovations in Citizen Kane. The film earned 7 Academy Award nominations and took home 2, Best Director for Ford and Best Supporting Actress for Jane Darwell as Ma Joad. Over the years, legends have teased that Ford fought off pressure to soften the film's message. Whether myth or memory, that creative defiance helped lock The Grapes of Wrath into the canon, not just as a faithful adaptation, but as a defining snapshot of American endurance. A Place in the Sun. In 1951, George Stevens tackled one of Hollywood's boldest literary adaptations with A Place in the Sun, reworking Theodore Dreiser's controversial novel, An American Tragedy from 1925. The film didn't just modernize the source, it reshaped the romantic drama genre. At the center, Montgomery Clift is George Eastman, torn between Shelley Winters' working-class Alice Tripp and Elizabeth Taylor's privileged Angela Vickers. Taylor, just past her 18th birthday during production, stunned critics with a performance far beyond her years. A handful proposed her off-screen bond with Clift intensified their on-screen chemistry, rumors that only deepened after their long-standing friendship became Hollywood lore. Stevens, famously meticulous, reportedly shot over 400,000 feet of film to capture the psychological tension that defines nearly every frame. His obsession with detail earned him the Academy Award for Best Director. The film ultimately claimed 6 Oscars, including Best Writing, Best Cinematography, and Best Costume Design. Clift's brooding method performance became a benchmark in screen acting, while Winters shattered her comedic image with a raw portrayal that critics hailed as a career-defining shift. The lake scene, filmed at Big Bear Lake, remains one of cinema's most chilling moral collapses. Decades later, some film scholars still debate whether Stevens' adaptation softened Dreiser's harsh social critique or simply updated it for a post-war audience. Either way, A Place in the Sun still ranks as a gold standard for literary adaptations done right. The Cane Mutiny. The Cane Mutiny, unveiled by Columbia Pictures in 1954, did more than adapt Herman Wouk's Pulitzer-winning novel. It ignited turmoil within the Pentagon. Directed by Edward Dmytryk, the film probed the delicate psychology of command during combat, with Humphrey Bogart delivering one of his most memorable performances as the increasingly paranoid Captain Queeg. His jittery fixation on steel ball bearings became cinematic shorthand for unraveling leadership. Insider talk claims the U.S. Navy pressed for script modifications to tone down the depiction of ineptitude, worried about harming its public reputation. The studio apparently complied, maintaining a fragile balance between critique and patriotism. The outcome proved both critically admired and commercially successful, sweeping up 7 Academy Award nominations, including Best Picture and Best Actor for Bogart. Some film historians suggest that the Navy's assistance included unspoken conditions, an implicit deal to preserve institutional regard while permitting certain criticisms. Regardless, The Cane Mutiny remains one of the most psychologically intricate military dramas of the classic studio era. East of Eden. East of Eden may have only adapted the final portion of John Steinbeck's sprawling novel, but what it left out in scope, it made up for in raw emotion. Released in 1955 and directed by Elia Kazan, the film zeroed in on the Cain and Abel-inspired tension between brothers Cal and Aaron Trask, played by James Dean and Richard Davalos, and their stern father Adam. Dean's performance, filled with vulnerability and defiance, stunned audiences and earned him a posthumous Oscar nomination. Stories circulated on set about Dean clashing with Kazan over character interpretation, with some crew members claiming the friction added to the film's intensity. The film's selective adaptation, focusing on just a quarter of the book, sparked debate among critics, but Steinbeck himself reportedly approved of Dean's casting, calling him perfect for the role of Cal. That endorsement alone helped anchor the film in literary and cinematic history. Shot in Technicolor and set against California's Salinas Valley, the movie captured the emotional weight of the novel while condensing its generational sprawl into something immediate and unforgettable. The Diary of Anne Frank. The Diary of Anne Frank, released in 1959, arrived not as a typical adaptation, but as a cinematic balancing act, one that dared to translate a harrowing personal account into mid-century Hollywood's restrained visual language. Premiering on March 18, 1959 in New York, the film landed at a time when post-war America was still grappling with the emotional weight of World War II. Director George Stevens, a former U.S. Army officer who had filmed the liberation of the Dachau concentration camp, approached the project with a deep respect rarely seen in mainstream cinema of the era. Determined to maintain authenticity, Stevens had a full-scale replica of the Amsterdam Annex built on a Los Angeles soundstage, matching the real dimensions down to the inch. The result was a set so claustrophobic that even crew members, by some accounts, found it emotionally challenging to work inside. Shelley Winters, cast as Mrs. Van Daan, immersed herself so deeply in the role that she later donated her Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress to the Anne Frank House in Amsterdam, an act that some interpreted as a gesture of atonement, others as a tribute. The casting of Millie Perkins as Anne became a lightning rod for debate. A former model with no acting credentials, Perkins was an unconventional pick. Some critics applauded the choice, citing her unpolished innocence. Others claimed she lacked the emotional range to convey such a charged role. Industry buzz held that Stevens picked her precisely because she wasn't a trained professional, aiming to capture Anne's hopeful spirit without the baggage of method acting. While the film preserved Anne's perspective, it avoided depicting the full severity of her ultimate fate. Her death in Bergen-Belsen went unseen, and references to the broader horrors of the Holocaust were toned down. This restraint provoked some for minimizing the grim reality, but defenders argued it underscored the diary's universal message instead of its tragic conclusion. Stevens often explained in interviews that he wanted viewers to feel the stillness, to sit with the weight of what remained unsaid. Even decades later, The Diary of Anne Frank stands as a notable example of Golden Age Hollywood engaging historical tragedy with a blend of reverence, risk, and understatement. Its legacy resides not only in what it showed, but in what it deliberately withheld. The Snake Pit. In 1948, Hollywood made an unanticipated move. A major studio feature concentrated on mental health, and tackled it head-on. That was The Snake Pit, adapted from Mary Jane Ward's partly autobiographical novel. Olivia de Havilland played Virginia Cunningham, a woman confronting life in a psychiatric institution for schizophrenia, a performance that garnered her an Academy Award nomination. Already an Oscar winner at the time, de Havilland allegedly immersed herself in psychiatric wards to prepare, signifying the seriousness of the production's approach. Director Anatole Litvak embraced a disorienting style. Expressionistic camera angles and unsettling soundscapes did more than decorate the film's aesthetic. They mirrored Virginia's psychological turmoil. Film scholars frequently name The Snake Pit as among the earliest American films to use such cinematic tactics to convey mental distress. Its influence spread beyond theaters. Contemporary sources, including a 1949 New York Times piece, credited the film with inspiring reform in psychiatric hospitals across over 20 states. Even then, Surgeon General Leonard A. Scheel acknowledged the movie's part in reshaping public sentiment. For a post-war audience largely unacquainted with psychiatric treatment, the film was a startling revelation. Despite its somber elements, The Snake Pit found substantial box office success and earned 6 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. It won for Best Sound. an appropriate honor given how powerfully it used audio to highlight mental anguish. Critics were far from unanimous. Some accused it of amplifying mental illness for effect, while others lauded it as a necessary societal wake-up call. Regardless, it ignited a national dialogue that Hollywood had mostly steered clear of. According to rumor, studio bosses initially hesitated to approve the screenplay, anticipating outrage or viewer discomfort. Yet their risk paid off. To this day, The Snake Pit stands as one of the most audacious mid-century adaptations. Proof that a film spun from a best-selling novel could challenge taboos, spark broad debate, and still draw large crowds. Payton Place. When Grace Metalius published Payton Place in 1956, critics dismissed it as tawdry pulp, but readers devoured it. Over 60,000 copies sold in its first 10 days, and by year's end, it had topped 3 million. The novel tore through the illusion of small-town purity, spotlighting subjects like incest, repression, and moral hypocrisy, topics largely taboo in the buttoned-up climate of the 1950s. Hollywood saw both danger and gold in its popularity. When 20th Century Fox adapted it for the screen in 1957, much of the novel's grit was softened to appease the production code, but its social critique endured. Director Mark Robson preserved enough edge to expose the corrosive power of secrets cloaked in civility. Lana Turner's casting as Constance Mackenzie added both glamour and gravitas, earning her the only Oscar nomination of her career. The film scored 9 Academy Award nods, including Best Picture and multiple acting categories, and went on to gross over $25 million in domestic rentals. Though some critics balked at its sanitized take, its impact was undeniable. The success spawned a sequel in 1961 and a primetime television series in the mid-60s. Payton Place proved that even a diluted version of forbidden material could challenge prevailing norms, and still leave an indelible cultural mark. The Old Man and the Sea. The Old Man and the Sea, released in 1958, arrived with the weight of a Pulitzer Prize-winning novel behind it, and the burden of translating Ernest Hemingway's minimalist prose into cinema. Directed by John Sturges and starring Spencer Tracy, the film leaned heavily on narration, allegedly at Hemingway's own suggestion. Some critics praised Tracy's performance, even as others questioned whether the film's slow, meditative pace truly captured the novel's quiet intensity. Off-camera, speculation ran rampant that Hemingway was privately dissatisfied with the final cut, despite publicly offering his approval. Adding to the intrigue, chatter around Hollywood suggested that Tracy, nominated for an Academy Award for the role, had clashed with the studio over the production's direction, though no fallout was ever made public. The movie's use of real ocean footage mixed with studio tank shots ignited discussion over its technical choices, especially in an era when location filming was becoming more prevalent. While not universally acclaimed, the adaptation remains a fascinating artifact of mid-century Hollywood's effort to wrestle with literary subtlety, and the challenge of filming a narrative where most of the conflict unfolds in a man's mind. Gone with the Wind. Gone with the Wind stormed into theaters in 1939, adapted from Margaret Mitchell's best-selling novel just 3 years after its release. It wasn't just a film, it was a phenomenon. The movie racked up 10 Academy Awards, including 8 competitive and 2 honorary, and still ranks among the highest-grossing films of all time when adjusted for inflation. But its road to cinematic glory was anything but smooth. The search for Scarlett O'Hara became a full-blown media spectacle, with approximately 1,400 actresses interviewed and around 400 screen-tested. According to Hollywood legend, Vivien Leigh arrived on set during the fiery Atlanta scene and boldly declared she was born to play Scarlett. Whether fact or myth, it fit the film's chaotic energy. Director George Cukor was dismissed early in production, replaced by Victor Fleming, who later collapsed from exhaustion before filming wrapped. The dramatic burning of Atlanta? That was no special effect. Crews torched old studio sets, including remnants from King Kong, The Garden of Allah, and King of Kings. And then came history. Hattie McDaniel, cast as Mammy, became the first black actor to win an Oscar. Her acceptance speech at the 1940 ceremony included the line, "I sincerely hope I shall always be a credit to my race and to the motion picture industry." Yet she was forced to sit at a segregated table, a stark reminder of the era's contradictions. Today the film draws both praise and protest, hailed for its scale and storytelling, but equally scrutinized for its romanticized portrayal of the antebellum South. That friction keeps Gone with the Wind at the center of cultural debate, a masterpiece both celebrated and contested. Rebecca. Alfred Hitchcock's first American film, Rebecca, released in 1940, was more than just a gothic thriller. It was a battleground of egos, censorship, and creative control. Adapted from Daphne du Maurier's wildly popular 1938 novel, the film was produced by David O. Selznick, fresh off the triumph of Gone with the Wind. Selznick demanded strict fidelity to the book, even dictating dialogue and camera angles. Hitchcock, known for his visual economy and pre-planned storyboards, reportedly bristled under the weight of Selznick's micromanagement. Biographer Donald Spoto suggests Hitchcock once mocked Selznick's obsession with control, calling the producer's involvement a test of endurance. The conflict intensified when the Hays Code forced a major rewrite. In the novel, Maxim de Winter murders his wife, but the film had to portray her death as accidental. Hitchcock allegedly called the change morally dishonest, but complied. Tales circulated that Laurence Olivier, cast as Maxim, lobbied hard for Vivien Leigh, his then partner, to play the lead. Selznick refused, fearing audiences would see only Scarlett O'Hara. Joan Fontaine ultimately landed the role and earned an Oscar nomination for her restrained, anxious performance. Judith Anderson's turn as the chilling Mrs. Danvers became an iconic piece of cinematic villainy. Rebecca went on to win Best Picture at the 13th Academy Awards, though Hitchcock himself lost Best Director, a twist that still frustrates film historians. George Barnes' shadowy cinematography and Franz Waxman's eerie score sealed the film's legacy. Today, Rebecca endures as a rare case where artistic tension, studio interference, and censorship combined to produce a haunting classic that neither its director nor its producer could fully claim as their own. If you've enjoyed this video, please leave a like and comment. Also consider subscribing and hitting the notification bell to get notified of our new videos each week. Thanks for watching.